Okay, ready? A number of years ago, I was presenting a workshop at a conference. As I began to speak, I tripped over my words and immediately had a shame attack. I began obsessing about how badly I messed up. I felt enormously foolish, and I was terrified that everybody in the audience was judging me as harshly as I was judging myself. It was not a fun time. Some of you know this experience of how quickly calm can flip into fear. My body was filled with heat. My heart was pounding. Adrenaline and cortisol were shooting like geysers in my brain, getting my body to be shaky just at the moment that I most needed to be calm and steady. Somehow I got through and pulled off the talk. Day 2 of the conference, my work partner at the Resilience Group, Beth Weinstock, asked about my night. "Oh God," I said. "I went home and I regaled my husband with how badly I had messed up." Suddenly, Beth's face went blank. "I have no idea what you're talking about," she said. Instantly, I realized I was under the spell of my inner critic so much that I never even checked in with her. She was in the room. She heard me speak. She could have given me perspective. Why didn't I check in with her? Quite simply, I believe my inner critic. That's the way it works. The inner critic is the voice of authority. It's certain of what it thinks. There's no doubts. There's no maybes. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. It simply judges. Beth and I stood there staring at each other saying, "How can this happen? How can you be prepared and confident and in a flash get emotionally hijacked into intense levels of self-doubt, insecurity, and fear-based thinking with the most negative of storylines?" We've discovered that being prepared, being self-assured, doesn't shield us from the power of our limbic system. That's our emotional brain. What works? Well, what works is to help to understand the nature of how the emotional brain works, to exaggerate how bad things are, to predict terrible consequences to follow, to shame and criticize and blame us. Way back when, click to the next slide, way back when we were up against four-legged creatures, say that again, way back when, in our earliest development as human beings, we were up against four-legged creatures, like the tiger. We didn't have claws and we didn't have teeth to defend ourselves. We had a brain. Our brain alerted us to threat and danger by getting us to smell, getting us to hear sounds, getting our body to freeze in place or run for cover. As many of you know, the field of neuroscience is burgeoning with new discoveries, all of which confirm that we simply cannot think our way out of fear. The neurochemical reaction is far too powerful, and it overrides the mind's ability to think reasonably and effectively. Makes sense, doesn't it? After all, that is our experience. With fear-based thinking, the brain fires up in ways that are similar to a smoke alarm going off despite there being no smoke. The alarm goes off and we start looking around to figure out what's wrong. We get worried, and by the time we realize that there's no fire, it's a false alarm, we're all stirred up with worry, maybe even panic. That's the workings of our inner warrior in a nutshell. That inner warrior doesn't operate in a vacuum. It's got a support system, and that's our inner critic. Think about it for a moment. Another click of a slide. Think about for a moment how parents train children to be safe. we don't speak in gentle tones of voice. Instead, we purposely speak harshly and we try to scare them. We say things like, "Don't touch that hot stove, you're going to get burned. Don't run out into the street, you're going to get killed." What kids do? They imitate our tone of voice and they repeat our words and they just keep doing that imitating and repeating. And by the time they're 4 years old, this inner critic voice is hardwired into the brain and it remains there for life. The inner critic doesn't only scare us, it blames us as well. As children, if for any reason our needs get frustrated, our inner critic insists it must be our fault. At first, it's pretty simple. It must be me. There must be something I'm doing to cause this problem. And as we get language, we elaborate. "You're too needy. That's why mom's not paying attention to you. You're too loud. That's why the kids are laughing in the playground. You're too pushy. That's why you didn't get invited to the birthday party." And as we get older, we get more and more elaborate with our stories. All fiction. If you think about it, that's what happened to me at the conference. In a split second, my mind created this fear-based story that was terrifying to me because I thought it was accurate. So what's a person supposed to do about all of this? Consider what we do these days with our emails. We've developed a skeptical eye and an ear to look at what comes across our inbox. Even those things that might seem reasonable. Because what happens if we don't do that is that we are at risk of getting scammed. And then our computer can get a virus. Well, with our emotionally based thinking, it's quite similar. We're at risk of getting scammed, and then we suffer. So, what we need is what Beth and I call an inner coach. Click. An inner coach is a part of the mind that's reasonable and rational. The inner coach recognizes that we all have an inner critic that shames and blames us. And we all have an inner warrior that generates worst case scenarios and creates these stories that scare us. The inner coach helps us to take a moment and pause, take a deep breath, and get calm in our mind and our body. The inner coach also helps us to picture an imaginary remote control and to click on pause or mute the negative self-talk. Our inner coach helps us to separate fact from fiction, to refrain from taking things personally. It also helps us to speak with a more supportive and encouraging voice. Yes, of course, all of this is way simpler said than done. When a client of mine was terrified about asking for a raise, I encouraged her to use an inner coaching voice to say to herself, "I know you're really scared. That's okay, but you're going to need to do this anyway. No one's going to offer you more money. You're going to need to request this. It may feel like this is a bold act. That's okay. You need to do it anyway." And another client was in anguish over not hearing back from a colleague he had emailed. He was ready to give in to defeat pretty easily. I encouraged him to stick with it, email a couple more times, and if that didn't work, call on the phone or send a letter the old-fashioned way. We discussed how his inner coach could say to him, "Stop taking this personally. You have no idea what's going on with this person. You need them way more than they need you right now. So your job is to be persistent, to stick with it, and to not give up so easily." For some of us, it helps to write down the words needed for our positive self-talk. For others, it helps to say the words out loud and hear ourselves speak. it may feel awkward. But if you think about it, most any skill we've ever learned in our life has begun with the willingness to tolerate feeling awkward. In order to protect ourselves, we need to manage fear so that fear doesn't manage us. In order to do that, there are 3 steps. 1, we need to hear the story of our inner worrier and our inner critic. Because if we don't hear it, we can't do anything about it. 2, we need to pause and interrupt the automatic fear-based thinking. And 3, we need to resist giving credibility to our inner stories. When we do these 3 things, we empower ourselves with more courage, we boost our self-confidence, we sustain a greater sense of well-being, and fortify resilience. Click.
11 minutes and 16